Hey everyone, and welcome to the Community Exchange podcast brought to you by OpenWeb. On this podcast, we're tracking the development and growth of the community economy, the emerging economic engine of the open internet. We're doing that by talking to the leaders in media tech, trust, and beyond who are bringing it to life. Joining me today is Jeremy Hlavacek, Chief Commercial Officer at Experian Marketing Services. You know, the more people I talk to, data-driven advertising has been both the promise and the bane of digital advertising for as long as anyone seems to be able to remember. Data was supposed to help advertisers hone in on their exact audience and create better experiences for consumers. But I think most people will tell you that promise didn't exactly materialize. Brands complain about wasted ad spend, consumers revolt against the Big Brother style big data tactics, and that user experience, of course, is impacted by the need to fill as many pixels as possible on the screen with revenue generating ads at all times. So, regardless, still, advertising funds the internet, and it's imperative that we get it right. To Jeremy, the community economy is an opportunity for companies with high quality data sets to lead the way in creating a web that delivers advertising that works equally for publishers, consumers, and brands alike. Jeremy is no stranger to innovating solutions to difficult problems. He built some of the first programmatic advertising businesses on both the buy and sell side of the industry, and he's recognized as a leader in ad technology. Prior to joining Experian, he helped transform the weather company from what was a traditional cable network into a data and tech platform that was eventually purchased by IBM and rebranded Watson Advertising. Now, let's get on to our discussion with Jeremy Hlavacek, the Chief Commercial Officer at Experian Marketing Services. To start, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and what kind of work you're involved with at Experian?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And thanks for having me on here. I'm really excited to have this conversation. So I joined Experian almost a year ago as the Chief Commercial Officer across both our Experian Marketing Services business, as well as an ad tech company called TapAd, which we acquired a little over 2 years ago. I've been deep in the data-driven advertising space for close to 15 years now, most recently at the weather company, which became IBM Watson Advertising. Before that, I was at one of the early agency trading desks called Varick Media. So I've always had an appreciation for the value of data being used in digital advertising. At the same time, there's a lot of change in the data space. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies like Experian that have high quality data sets and are building more, ad tech capability and kind of moving into this market, bringing what I think are very responsible and mature practices around data. I think it's going to help us be really successful in the market.
Great. Yeah, thanks for joining us. And Francis, you're the Chief Advertising Officer at OpenWeb. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and the work that you do with us at OpenWeb?
Thank you. Yeah, and again, very excited to be here. So I joined OpenWeb via acquisition. So I was the co-founder of Adulike, which was started in sort of January 2011. We started up as a European kind of native ad platform back in the day. I've really grown as an omni-channel SSP and started working with OpenWeb over those years. I've been in ad tech from 2003, I think. So I've been in the game a little while, and the combination of Adulike and OpenWeb and Jing and other business that's been brought into the fold more recently. It's super exciting. We're kind of building this kind of community economy, building this kind of the community platform as we're looking at it, and data is a very core element of that. And my role is to really kind of build our demand-facing business, which is a lot, but we're getting there.
All right, thanks for joining us. And like you said, this podcast is all about the community economy. And when we say community economy, I should probably just define some terms. What we're referring to is the future state of the open internet, and we see it emerging today. It's this kind of like new configuration where publishers and brands can become, with their community, an economic engine that's empowered to thrive independently, specifically beyond the walled gardens that really characterize Web 2.0. So of course, key to this is their ability to understand their community, their users, their consumers, their audience, So I'll throw this question to Jeremy. You've said marketers need to curate the data that they collect. So given the changing dynamics and the rising importance of community, what kind of data do you believe marketers should focus on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, my sense is that, things kind of change, but they also stay the same, right? So marketers are always going to be interested in some very core principles, but technology changes, environments change, and they have to think about how to apply those core principles to the modern ecosystem, right, that we all work in. So, the things that I think marketers care about today, just as they did many years ago when they were looking at television or print or early online advertising, they certainly care about identity. So they want to know how many users they have, right, in certain channels or environments, whether that's a streaming environment or a mobile app or a website or on a publisher. They want to have an idea of just who are those users. And then there's a second, set of characteristics, which, roughly referred to as behavioral characteristics. So once you know a little bit about, maybe you have Jeremy on your properties, what do you know about Jeremy, right? Maybe you have some information about his gender, family background, household income, some of his interests, right? And that's all for the purposes of creating a better experience, both for advertising and content, right? So personalization, when done well and not, annoying or bothering users, is a great thing. And it adds value to the experience of the publisher. It adds value to the experience of the user. And it helps make the marketer more successful.
Sure. A question for you to add on to that, Jeremy, would be, obviously curation can kind of work on multiple levels. How do you feel like there seems to be a kind of movement in terms of curation on the sell side? Is that something that you kind of see, and what's your kind of view there?
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I think that movement is picking up steam very quickly. I think, as we all know, we've read headlines now for many years about cookies going away and changes from, whether it's big companies like Apple or, various government policies. But I think there is a real move to let the entities that own the relationship with the consumer, right? And I would traditionally think of that as publishers more than any other ecosystem player. I know great publishing brands like, the Weather Company or the New York Times or the Washington Post or NBC Universal or, all these great media brands that I've known for many years. I have relationships with them as a consumer, and, I might be okay sharing some portion of personal data, whether that's an email address or some other kind of identifier. I think that's reasonable. With certain brands, I have relationships, right? So I think marketers can also build some of their own first-party data, but they're never going to have as much scale as a publisher or folks on the sell side. So I think as long as the two principles in the classic marketing equation are the ones making these decisions and making them in a responsible way, I think that's good for the ecosystem. I think where things can run into trouble is if there's too many middlemen that are behaving irresponsibly with data, right? That's something I think we've seen in this market for over the past 10 years. And that's really problematic, right? And I think that's going to be cracked down on by governments, tech platforms, others. So I just think that treating data in a responsible way is going to be critically important. And I think the people who are most equipped to do that are, one, the big media brands on the sell side, publishers, and to some degree, the very largest marketing brands. But I really think publishers at the end of the day are going to have the most scaled first-party consumer relationships. And that's got to be the focus for, I would say the next 5 years at least.
Sure. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that there's also questions around how people access that data from the sell side. Do you have any kind of view of what the winning strategy is there?
Yeah, I think, one, I like the term that you used earlier around curating, right? So I've talked about this in past lives and various articles. You can collect data, right? You can sort of pile it all up and have a really big pile of cookies or maids or emails or IDs or whatever you happen to be using. That's fine. But the value really starts to unlock once you curate that data and you understand what you have and you start to apply it in intelligent use cases. There was a meme that was going around a few years ago of Lego bricks, right? And it sort of showed, a big pile of Lego bricks mixed together. And then it showed sort of organizing them by shape and color, and then ultimately building like a really beautiful little Lego house. I actually worked at Lego earlier in my career, so I really like that meme. But I think it's a nice way of expressing the idea of curating, collecting, curating, and activating data in a way that ultimately delivers an end product or value, right? And I think we're still in early phases, right? With a lot of parts of the ecosystem. I think many people are focused on collecting. So they want their pile of Lego bricks to be as big as it can possibly be. But they may not have done all the work to organize that data, clean that data, curate that data, and then ultimately build some sort of product of value, right, at the end. And that's where I think, publishers and others in the ecosystem probably need help, right, from the right companies to do that. And I think that's a big opportunity in the space.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, and you mentioned in there the responsible collecting of data. So one of the keys that makes this whole system of the community economy really work is trust between end users, publishers, brands, everyone who collects data, basically. And I think for a long time, the whole online ad ecosystem has seen trust as a nice to have, something that is a good add-on. But I think as we move ahead into this more kind of decentralized model, it's a must. So on that note, how do you balance respect for data privacy with the need to deliver results for advertisers and like you said, improved experiences for users as well?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a trade-off, right? Or, you use the word balance there. I think advertisers and marketers want the same thing, right? I don't think they want results that are, come together through some shady kind of backdoor data practices, right? That's ultimately going to hurt them in the long run. And I think brands are well aware of the risk that brings to the table for them. An interesting thing just about Experian as a company, we have a long history of managing data from consumers. We've done this for over 100 years. We've become more active in kind of the marketing ecosystem in kind of the recent years and decades. But it's been fascinating for me to work at the company and see, exactly how much effort goes into protecting data, storing it in a secure way. As we were trading emails to get ready for this podcast, there were a couple of things that were behind a firewall, and we had to get those sorted out. So security is critically important. And then I think also having some kind of mechanism to communicate with consumers if there's something incorrect in their data. So in our core business in credit reports, if there's an inaccurate piece of information on my credit report, that could affect my mortgage, that could affect my ability to get a credit card, right, and use credit in the world, which is essential to everyday life. Just think about everything you're going to do today. When you buy a cup of coffee or a sandwich for lunch, you need a credit card that works. So we take not only the security, but the accuracy and the consumer relationship around data incredibly seriously. And we have a variety of services around that, which were very interesting to me because this doesn't happen so much in a lot of the digital ecosystem, but things like customer service departments. So if your credit report is wrong, you can call up Experian and get that corrected. And there's digital ways to do that too. So I think that's actually a really interesting insight and model for the digital advertising ecosystem to say, hey, are we servicing consumers, right? I know we've made some efforts around, icons on ads and things like that. And that's a good start. But I think you have to think about it in terms of like, what if your grandmother, right, wanted to to make a change to her online digital profile. And we're in a world now where there's plenty of people using the internet. It's not just smart, young, digitally savvy folks. So I think the idea of customer service and really making sure that customers and users feel like they're in control, they can correct errors and set the record straight with their data is really important. So I'm excited to see that come to more of the digital advertising ecosystem. And again, that's why I'm bullish on Experian, obviously, because that's in our DNA, right? That's not even a negotiable question. It's just what we do.
Sure. Do you think that we as an industry do enough to kind of educate users around data and the value of data and the trade-off between, a free internet and quality publishing and all these kind of other things?
No, not at all. I mean, it's I was joking earlier, but last time you explained what you did to your parents or your uncle or your grandparents, right? Like, we work in a very sophisticated industry. There's a lot of incredibly smart people in this industry. That's fantastic, and it makes me really excited to come to work every day. But we also need to recognize that and acknowledge that many of these advanced things that we're doing, whether it's around data or AI or analytics or technology, to the average person, they can be pretty confusing, right? And the part that I really liked about what you said there is that even if you don't understand the nuances of maybe how an ad call, gets tagged with a piece of data, we at least need to educate consumers that data-driven advertising allows the creation of high-quality content from the best publishers and media owners in the world, right? And I'm personally very passionate about the role of high-quality media and publishing content and what the role that plays in society. We could go in a lot of directions on this, but I think we all know, and I think it's actually been demonstrated to us over the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, that things can get a little hairy, right? If we're not curating, editing, supporting the very best, news, weather, sports, and information outlets, political outlets, right? A lot can go wrong in our world, and media is just a really important part of what I would call like the social contract of living in a democracy. And I think we need to appreciate that. And my one hope, I think, of some of the challenges of recent years is that maybe we've shined a light on that, and we need to remind ourselves that actually having really high quality news and information all the way up from the largest national publications down to your local newspaper or blog or whatever it may be, that's really important in terms of how we go about our day and make important decisions, right, around politics or money or family or friends or where you live. So we just have to support that ecosystem, and that's something I think we can do a lot more explaining around is why that's important to have.
Cool. And you mentioned before there is a regulatory component to all of this, and one that we can probably expect to continue to grow. So how do you see the relationship between marketers and consumers evolving? Some have characterized this as like a new era of privacy regulations.
For sure, right? And if you follow the local news and headlines from those high quality publications, that many states in the United States are putting legislation in place right now, right? I think there was it was Iowa or a state just recently passed some new regulations about how they want digital data to be treated. These bills have been back and forth in Congress. I've been involved with the IAB and other groups around this. There's a lot of people who are working on this. So I think we're on a path towards what will likely become in the United States some sort of national data privacy policy, right? I think many folks recognized years ago that the way federal legislation works in the United States is that the states are sort of these laboratories of democracy, right? So the states are kind of coming up with these various bills. California has their version, North Carolina has their version. And eventually the federal government steps in and says, actually, we need to kind of unify all this and have one sort of system. And I think we're on that path right now. And, I don't have the latest count in front of me, but I know there are, 5 to 10 states that either have, data privacy laws in place, California being the biggest and probably most important, just because given the population there. But you're going to see more. And I think we're rapidly approaching the tipping point where the federal government will step in and say, actually, we want to, take the best practices from all these states that have started the process and build some sort of national law that really makes sense. And, look, I think we need to be, as a country and as an industry, we need to be thoughtful about regulation, right? I don't want to lose all the innovation and smart ideas that this industry has come up with over the last 10 years. And there's so much more to come, right? There's incredible things happening in AI, which are built off of data and involve privacy and information. So we got to be careful not to, throw the baby out with the bathwater or kill the golden goose. But I do think you're going to see more policy in this area. And the guiding principles that I always like to use, and I've heard this from attorneys for many years, is transparency and consent, which basically boils down to, do you know how your data is being used? Is that clear to you? So that's kind of what we were talking about before in terms of explaining to consumers what's happening. And then do you consent? Are you okay with it? And do you have the ability to say yes or no to that question? And that's where as I was speaking about the Experian capabilities, right, of servicing consumers around their data, we have that in our DNA, right? So I think that model is going to be coming to the digital ecosystem. And, I'm hopeful that folks like us on this call and Open Web and others can help shape that policy in a way that really works for digital innovation, but also protects consumers and gives us the right balance between those two interests.
Thank you. That's super interesting. I always find when there is new regulation and new policies and things that come into play, it also sparks a kind of evolution and a revolution in terms of kind of what people are innovating with. And you mentioned AI and generative AI. Is there any particular areas or any particular businesses that you see that are already at particular areas, even within the Experian business, that you see as kind of really kind of pushing the envelope and doing some cool things in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment a little bit on AI. I worked for IBM Watson for a number of years, so I have some exposure to that. But I will also say that my personal view on that space is that it is still extremely early, right? A lot of the GPT-3 and 4 technology is, weeks or months old. So we don't really know where that's necessarily going to go. I would say for, Experian and for our business, the areas that are happening right now, right, where there's innovation occurring and different uses of data. It's funny, in this industry, we've been talking about the death of the cookie for, I think it's getting close to 5 years, right? I remember seeing that phrase in 2018 or 2019. So we've really been at it for a while. My personal thesis on that is that actually, it's not so much about the cookies dying. It's about channels that don't have cookies are growing really rapidly, right? And for us, that's things like streaming television and CTV. So here's an environment that was built, that was born without cookies, never had them to begin with, right? So never had that baggage, has grown really, really quickly among consumers, is rapidly growing with advertisers over the last 2 to 3 years. And for us, I think that's a peek into the future, right? Because I think it's really useful to look at that market and say, instead of speculating and imagining what the world without cookies might look like, well, here's a world right now where there's no cookies, and let's just take a look and see how that operates. And that's been a good business for us and other data companies, our competitors, because, marketers, advertisers, content owners still need identity solutions, behavioral targeting, all those things that they've become used to in digital. they need those in the streaming environment, but they don't have the cookie, they don't have a DMP, they don't have, all these tools of the 2010s. So we're helping those companies get to what I think is, sort of the best of both worlds, the advertising performance that they want, but with, data companies that have high quality data, perhaps a little bit better policies. We don't sell media, right? So we're not conflicted in any way. We're not like, a walled garden company where we have both the data and the media, right? So we're just in the data game, right? And this is what we've done for 100 years. I think we're just introducing ourselves and getting deeper with the marketing and advertising community, and we're finding that to be a really fruitful relationship.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, we haven't had cookies in Safari and Firefox and various other areas for a long time. Do you see do you see measurement coming more into play, and attention is a big area that's kind of growing in kind of how people kind of look at these kind of things? How do you see that kind of evolving over time?
Great question. And you're again, if we were playing buzzword bingo 5 years ago and we said, oh, do you think measurement's going to be a hot area? Like, I don't think anyone would have bet on that. But I was just at an event last week, sponsored by Paramount, a big measurement summit that they threw, and we, spoke a little bit about our capabilities there. This is absolutely a really important and white hot question for marketers and content owners, especially in the streaming ecosystem, because there's so much growth and so many dollars being, put into that ecosystem. Marketers want to know what's happening, right? And the interesting thing about it is that streaming television has, elements of television, right? That linear experience, long form content, sight, sound, and motion, traditional ad breaks. We're not talking about banner ads, but also elements of the digital ecosystem, right? It's a little bit more on demand, consumer in control, a little bit more choice, right? This isn't necessarily like a scheduled environment, right? People are choosing shows that they want to watch in real time. So there's kind of like a elements of the digital ecosystem that we're all, I come out of the digital side, so I'm very used to that. And there's elements of the linear system, and they're meeting in the middle, and it's kind of creating a world that is probably a little bit foreign to both sides, right? I think if you come out of digital, you're looking at things like, well, how do I get a click or a conversion or something I can measure and get the value out of this? But it's a 30-second spot. It's a television ad. No one's going to click on anything, right? It doesn't work that way. And if you're coming out of the linear side, you're saying things like, well, wait a second, should I use, Nielsen ratings for this? And it's like, I think a lot of people are starting to look beyond that and say, actually, it's not just about reach and frequency. We do have more targeting capability, and we do have more deterministic data. So maybe a panel-based approach needs another look, right? So it's a fascinating space to be in. I think, you're really smart to bring that up, that measurement is a hot area that marketers and content owners need to figure out. And I think, we're just happy to be part of that conversation, right? Because I think there are ways we can help. And there are ways that we partner with a lot of the other companies in the ecosystem to solve the problem.
Yeah, and we're talking now about how basically the whole landscape of digital marketing is changing, right? And we were talking about cookies going away. In many ways, they're already gone. Do you feel that the move away from cookies is in anticipation of those regulatory changes we were talking about?
Yeah, I think, if there's like one thing I would love to do, I'd love to be a fly on the wall at the Google strategy meeting, right? Where they're sitting there trying to decide, like, what do we do here? Do we, get rid of cookies? And we've got this big ad tech business. We bought DoubleClick all these years ago. We have a browser in Chrome. We have YouTube, so many interesting assets. Like, it must be, if you nerd out on corporate strategy, that's got to be like one of the most interesting rooms to be in. So yeah, I think it's a really challenging problem to say, how do we, preserve but also evolve our digital advertising business, right? If you're somebody like Google or even a small or medium-sized company or a publisher, how do you evolve, right? How do you prepare for the future? And where do you think regulations are going to go, right? That's not really determined either. Many of the states' laws are very different. Certainly once you go internationally, right? Like we're not even talking about, how the EU might be different than the US. Like that's a whole other challenge. We've grown up in this world of a very open digital internet, right? That goes everywhere around the world. And you sort of have the ability to get to scale very quickly and a lot of freedom to try different things. And I think we want to preserve that, right? I don't want to lose that innovation. I mean, I always say to folks like, look, on the whole, I think the last 20 years of developing the internet and the open web has been unbelievably beneficial to the world, right? I just think about my own life or people I know. There's very few people that I meet who say, "Oh, I'd like to go back to a world without the internet," right? I don't think that's the case. So we want to preserve that spirit that's made the internet and the open web specifically, such an amazing thing for society. But consumer protection is a real issue, right? And we have to find the balance in that. Again, I would point to again, if not that I'm in any kind of Google strategy meetings, but if I were sitting in that room, I would think about things like the CTV example that we just talked about, right? Maybe it's not so much about shutting down cookies on desktop web, which, let's be honest, is not really a growing market anymore. Maybe it's more about how do we plan for the channels of the future. So let's maybe build those without the cookie issue at all, right? Whether it's streaming television or, the YouTubes, the TikToks of the world, right? That's where the growth is. Can those be built without the baggage of cookies? And can we sort of grow our way out of the problem, right? That's how I would look at it. I would say rather than let's go back and reverse engineer, 20 years of desktop web advertising, I would say, actually, why don't we just focus on where the market's going and build those in a safe and privacy respectful way. So that may be happening. I don't know. I'm not in that room. Like I said, it's my dream to be a fly on the wall there. But it's going to be really interesting to see where it all goes.
Yeah. And that kind of relates to my next question here. So obviously we've been talking about, it's very important for brands to really be genuinely a part of the community that their consumers participate in. And in the process, to build those one-to-one relationships that empower them with the first-party data we've been talking about. So from the brand's perspective, what do you think is the best way for them to leverage data to do this, to locate themselves in the center of that cultural conversation that's relevant to them?
Yeah, and I think it touches on a lot of the points that we've talked about today. I think, I've worked at agencies, I've worked with brands and CMOs, and, the thing I think they need, which I think they probably know this in the back of their mind, but we need to really crystallize it, is some sort of feedback loop, right? Because what I see happening, or when I look back over the last 10 years, what I see happening is that, marketers started using data. They got better results, right? In a lot of their advertising, right? Whether it's programmatic ads or targeted ads, those clearly worked better for marketers. So that was a plus. But what they didn't capture enough of was the feedback from consumers to say, you know what, stop retargeting me, right? I've seen that pair of shoes. I've seen that. I already bought that item, right? That's annoying. It's no longer adding value. And I think if there was a way for marketers to capture more of that feedback, digest more of that feedback, and understand that, if you think about it strategically, why in the world would you spend advertising dollars to annoy your consumers? That is a lose-lose, right? You are spending your budget and you're actually working against your own KPIs. So I feel like marketers maybe don't have enough tools to capture what I would call, some of the negative feedback from consumers around being over-targeted or, using their data in a way that they don't like. Because I think one thing that is really, really good about the programmatic and ad tech ecosystem is this is an ecosystem that's really good at optimizing, right? Like we get there and we like get right down to the most efficient, highest performing, ad or dollar or click or cookie or piece of data, whatever. Like this ecosystem is really, really good at optimizing. And I think if there was a way to start capturing some of the negative feedback that consumers might be feeling into these machines and systems that we use, I know that most smart marketers would say, you know what, optimize that out. I don't want that in my plan, right? I need you to take that negative number and reduce it to zero because I don't want consumers having a negative experience with my advertising or my brand. So, I think if there are ways to start capturing some of the, what I would call negative consumer feedback. I don't like this targeting. I don't like this experience. Marketers would react to that, right? And they would very quickly stamp it out, right? Because they do not want to do that. One thing I'll just throw in at the end is this literally just happened last night, but there was a really funny New Yorker cartoon that I saw. And after this, I'll send it to you. Maybe you can include it in the podcast somehow. But it shows a woman sitting on a park bench talking to her friend. And the New Yorker cartoons, they're like a great little style. And they always have like one sentence under it that kind of captures it. And the comment was, I really don't like the, I want to get it right, but it's basically like, I don't like the digital profile that my digital advertising thinks I am, or I don't like who my digital advertising thinks I am. Right? So I saved it. I'll send it to you guys later, but it does capture that, right? Like, at this point as a consumer, you're using all sorts of digital products and that there's a machine on the other side who has these ideas about you. And maybe they're wrong. Maybe you don't like them. And is there a mechanism for you to say, hey, that's actually not me. That's not correct. This is not what I want. So I think the more we can capture that, it gets to that idea of customer service and, listening to consumers. I think that's the path out of this kind of issue that we've got right now.
Do you think, are there any particular, because I think when you are part of a community like that, you generally tend to share more of that kind of useful information. Obviously, you can still get the negative kind of feedback in there as well, and that's all part of the process, I think. Are there any kind of particular brands or even publishers that you think have fostered that kind of community culture well?
Yeah, I mean, I think premium publishers think about this a lot, right? When I was at Weather and knowing a lot of other really great premium publishers, there is teams of people who obsess about, your app store rating, right? Or why, a consumer might have stopped visiting a certain part of the site, or are they using a new feature? So, I mean, the Weather company did a great job of that. I know that many other large publishers do the same. But even when I think back to being involved in those conversations, there wasn't always, sometimes the data that we would get back from consumers and say an app store rating was a little bit vague, right? Like I was always hungry for more detail, right? Like what exactly do you love, right? What do you not like? Instead of just like, hey, I'll give you 4 stars or 5 stars or 2 stars or whatever, and you can trend that on a chart and say, oh, we're going up or down. But I was always hungry for a lot more detail about what exactly is it. And even when they said things like, hey, you know what, I didn't like that ad experience. It's like really good to know, like why, right? Like what about it, right? Was it too big? Was it intrusive? Were you in the middle of something? Did we interrupt your experience when you were about to watch a video, right? Was it just like off targeting? Was it not relevant to you? Was it maybe like, distasteful in a way, right? Like I'm not interested in this weight loss program or whatever it may be, right? So capturing all that consumer feedback, I think in a more granular and precise way, is a really important thing. And going back to the very beginning of our public conversation, premium publishers is the best place to do that, right? That's sort of the role that publishers play in the ecosystem. They are the hub or the center of that community, right? They sort of create the community. They're kind of the magnet that brings the community together. And when you work with publishers, they use terms like that, right? We talk about weather fanatics, right? Or news geeks, or, sports nuts, right? So publishers think about audiences and communities a lot. You could argue that's kind of core to who they are. So that's the right place to really capture that feedback around both content, advertising, and anything else that might be on consumers' mind. Publishers are always going to be the number one owner of that relationship.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for. But thanks so much for your time. I think we've really laid out how publishers, marketers, and brands and users have a win-win-win, in this kind of emerging framework outside the walled gardens in the community economy. So again, thanks for your time, Jeremy and Francis. All right, you've been listening to The Community Exchange, an open web podcast that tracks the emerging community economy and talks to the leaders at the companies who are bringing it to life. We will see you at the next episode.